Her long hair, still wet from the shower, had been combed down her back in a wet swath. Hilda was sitting on the floor, her round, wet boobs still wet from the shower's water. She dried off the water with a towel, which then became wet. Hilda gasped when she saw a reflection in her bedroom mirror. Through the slightly open door, she caught a glimpse of the chiseled abs and square jaw of the mysterious stranger who shared her cabin. She stood and spun around, her breasts swinging heavily with the momentum. She grabbed the door and flung it open, revealing shirtless Torolf, quivering with desire in the hallway. Torolf was ashamed of being caught, but his shame made him even hotter for sex. He stepped into the room, and his bulging abs accidentally smushed into Hilda's rich chest. As Hilda's buttermilk bosoms squished up against his granite abs, Torolf almost had a dick aneurysm. Hello, good people. If you can't tell from the excerpt, which I tried very hard not to laugh through, today we're going to be talking about writing the nasty. That's right, sex scenes. Now, I have some experience writing sex scenes. I also have some experience just in general with sex scenes. It is a fairly well and open known fact that I have worked as a phone sex operator, so I have been in the midst of some of the weirdest, kinkiest, most genuinely bizarre fantasies that you could possibly imagine. So today we're going to go over what I learned doing this, what I've found to be the tips and tricks that really helped me write better and better sex scenes, and how you can do it too without preferably having to learn about what people really, really want to do with turkeys on Thanksgiving. Don't ask me. I will not tell you. You will never eat turkey again. So, moving on from that, we are going to talk about the top 10 tips and tricks for writing sex scenes, and we're going to go straight into it. Tip number 1. Choose your perspective carefully. When writing a sex scene, there are usually one or more perspectives. If there's just one, you know what to choose unless you really want to write from the perspective of an inanimate object, which is someone's kink, and we'll get into this later. But generally, in most books, sex scenes happen between 2 to 3 people. I'm going to mostly be focusing on 2-person sex scenes, just because the more people you include, the more nuanced and difficult it is to write those scenes and write them well. Pronouns get super wanky, unless everyone has different ones, which makes sex scenes really, really, really much easier. But we're going to mostly assume that we're going to be talking about 2-person sex. So, choose your perspective wisely. And there are a couple schools of thought on this. I am a big believer in trying to determine whether I'm writing a sex scene from the point of view of the person receiving the most pleasure or giving the most pleasure. And that will depend on your audience. Are you writing for people who want to be the center of someone's attention? Or are you writing for an audience that wants to do things to people in naughty and delicious manners? Deciding that early on will absolutely shape your sex scene from the ground up. Reactive versus proactive protagonists are a big thing in all of my writing discourse, and in sex scenes it's particularly important. Now, obviously these roles might swap during the sex scene, but the point of view might swap as well. So decide if you want a mix of reactive and proactive narrative, and decide which one you want to start and end on, and if it's going to be the same one throughout. So again, pick your right perspective, stick with it. Generally, I stick with the character who's going to have the biggest emotional impact from the sex. We're going to go into why emotion is so important later on, but it should be thought of from the very beginning. Whose scene is it? Who is going to be the interesting story? Start there. Tip number 2. Use all of your senses. Writing sex and romance that really, really catches the tangible, physical nature of the act is one where that you can taste and smell and feel and just touch. You want your readers to be able to get as much of that as they can through you. I generally keep kind of a wheel going and I spin it. And I just keep spinning it around to the various senses while I'm writing to make sure that I'm cycling through them at a very, fairly even pace. Sometimes I'll just make notes and check marks in columns saying, yeah, no, I did a nice touch thing here. He trailed his fingers along my skin, leaving goosebumps in their wake. It's a beautiful touch sensation, whereas, I could smell the sweat beading on her neck and couldn't help myself. I flicked out my tongue to lick it. That's taste and smell. You want to use as many of these as you can throughout the entirety of your sex scene because it will make it so much more visceral and real, and it will allow an audience to really dive in and be those characters in the moment. Tip number 3. Anticipation. Build it and build it and build it until they can take it no more. Most of this happens before you actually start writing the sex. You need to write characters who want to do the nasty more than they want to breathe. And when you're in it, you want to build up until the characters are ready to burst, until they will see stars. This should start on page 1 if it's a romance. It should not come out of nowhere. In fact, I'm very bad at doing this before scenes. Blame the fact that I usually, in my work have started mid-one or right at the beginning of one. I tend to just have characters turn around one day and be like, oh, you person who I've been forming an emotional bond with, wow, you're actually sexy. I kind of want to do you. This is not the best. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm currently in the process of interspersing all of that into a novel as we speak. But the longer you can postpone, whether it be the first touch, the first kiss, the first fade to black, you don't have to write a sex scene for it to still be meaningful and still be there. Like, sex off page can be just as good. Again, heightens anticipation. Anticipation is your friend. Push it until you are squirming with the want to just write this, to just get it over with, so these characters will stop thinking about each other instead of like the dragon that is attacking their village. That's where you want to actually put your sex scene. You want to put it when you cannot delay it any longer. Now, there's some exceptions here. There's nothing wrong with casual sex. There's nothing wrong with including casual sex in books. But even then, even if it's just a build-up over drinks where they're flirting and going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until one of them is just breaks and says, hey, wanna maybe go back to my house? That's fine. It doesn't have to be a book-long thing. But in whatever time you have, try to ramp up that anticipation as much as you can. 4. His fleshy man meat. Her quivering rose petals. Let's talk about euphemisms. Don't. If there are words that describe anatomy, mostly you can use them. They're not against the rules. Use real words. most sex scenes, like the one I was reading from at the beginning of this, are written with so many euphemisms that you don't know what's going on, and the metaphors are piling on like 12 deep, and all sense of like arousal and desire has completely vanished under the laughter of, what did you just call it? Excuse me, I don't want to put that in my mouth. And no, please keep it away from me. Euphemisms tend to just dig a hole that you can't climb out of without more euphemisms. If you're not comfortable writing about penises, maybe don't write sex scenes. There's nothing wrong with fading to black. There's nothing wrong with saying, and then they tumbled in the sheets, finding new heights of ecstasy, and pick it up in the pillow talk. You can keep it short, and sweet. You don't have to describe every single play-by. But if you are going to describe every single beautiful, exciting moment of it, don't ruin it by using really not helpful words. So, euphemisms are great in comedy, but don't put them in your, like, serious romances and fiction. Please, as a personal favor to me, I will laugh through your sex scenes instead of getting, like, all flushed and flustered and not wanting to read them on a bus. With the possible exception of, I might read them out loud on a bus if they're particularly bad and I'm alone on the bus with a bus driver I know and I'm trying to entertain them at 3 a.m. in the morning. This has happened more often to me than I care to admit. Number 5, and possibly my very favorite. This is something I learned the power of in doing my job. So there is an incredible, going back to anticipation, power in having a character tell another character exactly what they plan to do with them. It lets you kind of double dip, where you get the first rush of, and this is what we're going to do at the end when you can't take it anymore, and then get to go all the way through until the end when they can't take it anymore. It is kind of hard to pull off if this is your first sex scene, but if you're looking for a way to just level up, creating a character, one of your leads, who is very, very savvy about what they're doing and wants their significant other to really, really, really get going. That is an incredible tool to basically make a promise. I have a video on reader promises. This is like both a promise from the author to the reader, but also a promise between two characters that fulfills much the same general purpose. It's this is what you can expect from this sex scene. Keep reading. Number 6. Write healthy sex. That's right, folks. Use condoms. Talk about STDs. Have sex with different body types. Let gay people have sex. Let disabled people have sex. Let kinky people have sex. Let ace people have cuddles. You can write whatever you want, and sex scenes are a beautiful chance to normalize something that has been almost exclusively dominated by a couple different kinks and pairings for most of literature. There is so much good that can be done with just normalizing healthy discussions about sex. Characters just talking about, hey, what do you like having done to you? What do you like doing? Do you consent to all this laundry list of things that I really want to do to you? Consent talks are incredibly important. I detest everything about 50 Shades of Grey, especially how they deal with consent, but the one scene that I actually really, really liked was a negotiation scene. I wish more books had that, and not even as a formal, we sit and we fill out a contract. That's obviously very specific to specific plot lines, but just someone, leaning in and saying, I want to do all sorts of things with you. I want to touch you here and here and here. I want to do this and this and that. Will you let me? It provides a healthy framework for how to make consent sexy, for how to make, again, healthy sex appealing and enjoyable. And as an author who writes a lot about sex, that is one of the number one priorities I have, and I really hope other authors do too. Next tip is know your kinks. There's nothing wrong with writing vanilla sex. In fact, most sex on page is fairly vanilla. But there's a lot of kinky people out there, and they like sex scenes too. And you might be one of them. So, know your kinks. If you're going to include one in writing, make sure not only to study it in depth, talk to people, if you can, who are into it, or write kinks that you genuinely are into and know a lot about. If you've, never been tied up, check to see how bondage works. Make sure that your characters have safety scissors available and are, checking circulation and have a safe word. There's just so many little details that will turn off a reader who is very knowledgeable in whatever you're writing about if you are not knowledgeable as well. Plus, just learning about different, sexualities, different kinks, different, different avenues of sex will make your sex scenes more varied and diverse, and especially if you have series where there are multiple sex scenes, it gives each one of them kind of a different flavor, which is very, very nice. I remember reading the Valley of the Horses, and in that, in that series, a few books after that, I was skipping the sex scenes because I was bored with them. They were so frequent and they were the same. Big penis, big scream, yay sea stars, go off, have adventure. At a certain point it's just rinse and repeat, why are you doing this? I'd rather have a fade to black. When authors vary their sex scenes, when they let their characters explore new realms and push themselves and, find out what they're into, it's so much fun. Another really big thing about kinks, and this is another know your kinks, know what isn't a kink. Identities as kinks can get real iffy. Please be very, very tactful that, someone's identity can't be someone else's kink without that person's consent. Like, not gonna kink shame anyone, but please make sure there's consent all around and that you are not giving bad representation, kind of like in the healthy sex discussion. Please try to do things with tact. Number 8, make it mean something. A sex scene is great just as a sex scene, but it's fantastic when it means something to the characters. When it is an emotional climax, as it were, not just a physical one. When their stories are tied up into this renewed intimacy, or lack thereof. There's nothing that says you can't write a sex scene that just doesn't go particularly well. There's plenty of situations where that is a powerful story-moving block. And if it doesn't mean something, and again, there's nothing wrong with casual sex, this is not a bashing of that, I'm just saying that if it doesn't show something about a character, or let that character evolve, or let that relationship evolve, or devolve, then consider whether it's worth putting in a story. Every scene in a story should move a plot or a character along, and that includes sex scenes. They're not exempt from this. So find out what it means. And moving in from that to my number 9 tip is give it a through line. Whether that be a conversation that's happening between kisses, or a discussion that, a question is asked at the beginning that is answered at the end, or a character opens up throughout and, through the emotional intimacy, it touches something deep in them, and during pillow talk, some old emotional scar or story that they had forgotten or thing that they wanted to tell the other person comes out. Giving a plot through line or a character through line to hold and bookend your sex scene not only makes readers less likely to skim. I know a lot of readers do skim over sex scenes, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it also, I find, makes the sex scene more interesting because, again, you're adding to that sense of anticipation. It's not just will they or won't they orgasm. It's will they or won't they finish this conversation? Will they or won't they find emotional catharsis in each other's arms? And will this or won't this solve this relationship problem? The answer is probably no. Sex very rarely solves relationship problems. Just saying. Just saying. But give it a through line to give it meaning in the story and to give it depth. And finally, number 10. Don't be afraid to make it realistic. And by realistic, I mean to make it fun. Sex is funny. There are a lot of really strange noises. People fall off beds. Sex is funny. And sometimes writing that lighthearted, goofy side where someone just starts giggling uncontrollably or someone says, something that they thought was going to be super sexy and suave and the other character just face palms and laughs into a pillow until they're just cuddling and just having a wonderful time and laughing together. Those are the scenes I remember. Those are many ways the scenes I like to write. The realism is bits and pieces of everything I've talked about. It creates a grounded, heartfelt core to your sex scenes, which I think give them more weight than any amount of flowery language ever could. I mean, there's only so many ways to describe an orgasm, but there are a billion ways to describe genuine connection between people, especially when all of the extra stuff, whether it be clothes or other people or everything is just tossed out the room and it's just 2, 3, 5, 20, I'm not a judge, people lying together, being vulnerable and human in all of the sad and funny and sometimes difficult and heartbreaking ways. Don't hesitate to write people who don't necessarily love their bodies or who do love their bodies even though they're not what, society at large says is sexy. Write wonderful, larger people, write really skinny people being adored, write, anything that feels genuine, especially if it's genuine to you. It will shine through and make it memorable and make it wonderful. So, that has been my top 10 tips on writing sex scenes. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Please come back, subscribe, follow, like, all those things. Give this video a comment if you have your own tips and tricks on how to write amazing sex scenes, because I'm always learning and growing and want to know them. And also, join our community. The Plot Mom Discord is a growing, fun, inclusive, welcoming community of writers and readers and editors. There's all sorts there. We do writing sprints almost every day. We do workshops. We read each other's work. We critique it. It's a lot of fun. There will be a link below. Please come join us. You can also, if you want to help me out, buy my books at Amazon. Links will be below. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.